Welcome to Let's Talk Near Death, the podcast show that talks about life, death, and experiences somewhere in between. I'm Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and I hope you'll join me as I chat to everyday people with not so everyday experiences. You may also wish to join the conversation over in the Let's Talk Near Death online community, which is found at www.letstalkneardeath.com. Membership is free, or you're welcome to upgrade to join the live VIP events, to gain early access to episodes, or to receive extra VIP bonus material. Your support helps me to continue to get episodes out and to help grow the conversation around these types of experiences. But before then, let's talk near death.
It's still funny and strange for me as a retired Navy officer to talk about angels and guides and masters, but I have so much evidence from them. I started having what I call adventures in consciousness that I couldn't explain logically. All of a sudden, my finger twitched. I somehow knew I was supposed to pick up a pen, and I started writing this beautiful phrase. And one phrase turned into 2 to 10 to pages, at least 3 pages. And I realized the lines were rhyming. I'm not satisfied with these communications unless I tune into information that I couldn't possibly know and that the person I'm sitting with can validate.
Hello, and welcome back to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. We are currently in season 11, talking about after-death communication and communicating with the other side. It's an exciting time. I have to say that this topic is getting more and more interesting to me as we go through these conversations. Today will be no exception, I'm sure. Today's guest joining me is Suzanne Giesemann, who is a retired US Navy commander. She's a mystic, a medium, and a messenger of hope. She's a former US Navy commander who served as a commanding officer and aide to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on 9/11. She's been on quite a spiritual journey, and today Suzanne provides stunning evidence of the existence of the universal consciousness and our interconnectedness. Suzanne's also the author of 13 books, you heard that correctly, 13, and is one of the leading voices in mediumship and communication from beyond. So Suzanne Giesemann, thank you for being here today. A huge warm welcome to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast.
Well, thank you, Kirsty, and everybody who's tuning in. It's always an honor to share the messages.
Exactly. I'm so happy to be doing this today. So we're talking about after-death communication, which is something which is quite, I guess, prevalent in the way that you are going through this lifetime. You've got some amazing skills. You've got some interesting things that you're working on. How did this all begin?
Well, it's very important to let everybody who's listening understand that I am not what people would consider a born medium. I didn't discover that there's a greater reality. I had no idea that I could connect with those who inhabit that greater reality until well into my 4th decade. It was after I retired from my full military career that life took a sudden turn for me and propelled me on this very unexpected journey. And so my greatest message to everyone is it doesn't matter how old you are or if you have perceived discarnate beings before or not, the ability to connect across the veil is available to all of us.
I love that. That brings so much hope, doesn't it? So much hope that we can connect with our loved ones. So you're in the military, in the Navy. How did this all sort of come about? You said you were about 40 when this happened?
I was about 45, 47, somewhere around there. I was the aide to the head of the U.S. military on 9/11. We were out over the Atlantic and were the last aircraft in U.S. airspace and turned around and came back, returned to my office building, the Pentagon, staring at the wreckage. That really was the pivotal point that started me on this journey. Asking the deep life questions about those who had been there, right there in that building when the plane struck, and why were they in the wrong place at the wrong time? Why do some people die young? Those kinds of questions. But Kirsty, I didn't get satisfying answers at the time. So the day that I was retirement eligible, 20 years to the day that I joined the Navy, I retired and went off to live my dream with my husband, sailing into the sunset on our sailboat, sold the house, sold the cars, basically ran away from life. And I tell people that life has a way of catching up to you if you have lessons you're supposed to learn. And I didn't learn them on 9/11. The way the lessons became clear to me was when we got word while in Croatia. We had sailed across the Atlantic Ocean, really far from home, and found out that my stepdaughter, Susan, who was a sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps, had been crossing the flight line at work on a clear day, blue sky, a storm way off in the distance, and a bolt of lightning struck her. And they worked on her for 7 hours, but could not revive her. So she died that day along with our unborn grandson. She was 6 months pregnant at the time.
Goodness.
So you can see how now I'm asking those same questions, but with a much more personal focus. Why do some people die young? Why are some people in the wrong place at the wrong time? But Kirsty, jumping forward now to the fact that I reach hundreds of thousands of people with the messages of hope that I'm so blessed to share through my YouTube videos and courses and books and CDs, that I see now that Susan's death, which I know was just a transition to her ongoing life, was the catalyst to help others. So there was great purpose in it. Yeah.
Yeah, I often think that often in crisis moments, there is so much to be birthed in those moments, so much to come through, so much growth. And like you're saying, you probably wouldn't be doing the work that you are now if you hadn't gone through that. My heart does break a little bit for you. Okay, no, probably.
No, probably about it. There is zero doubt, because to go from that very left brain, analytical, logical, military mindset and have to undo a lot of that and now become very balanced, left brain and right brain, flowing, intuitive, and bring the two together to connect with spirits, that would not have happened otherwise.
So were you aware that's what you were doing at the time, trying to connect with spirit as you're asking these questions?
I was not aware of that at all. I didn't even know who I was asking them of. That was just general wondering, which is what we all do. And now I teach people that once you realize that we're not alone, not just our loved ones are the ones we connect with, but we connect with our own higher self, our soul essence, and masters, angels. It's still funny and strange for me as a retired Navy officer to talk about angels and guides and masters, but I have so much evidence from them that I can speak with confidence to say that instead of saying, why do these things happen? Do you see how that just kind of dissipates? And instead sit and get centered, take a deep breath and ask whoever's listening at a higher level, whoever has my answer, tell me, why do some people die young? You feel the difference. It's like a flashlight versus a laser beam when you ask that way, and then the answers come.
So how did those answers start to present themselves? Did you have some sort of connection with your daughter?
Well, that was my goal, and that was the start of all of this. And it can be for anybody if you institute some kind of a practice that trains you to focus the mind, to quiet the monkey mind and the chatter, to undo layers of human conditioning. For me, it was the inner knowing, if Susan exists, if I'm going to connect with her myself, I need to meditate. And that was back in 2006 when that was not a common practice like it is today. And so I really didn't know what I was doing. The first 3 weeks of sitting daily saying, Susan, I want to connect with you. If you're here, let me hear you. I fell asleep. And I know that a lot of people listening can identify with that. Yeah. But through that dedication and that commitment to connecting with Susan, if she was out there, by quieting my mind and setting that intention, I did not hear from her for quite a long while. However, my intuition started coming back online. My heart opened. My right brain started integrating with the left brain. I started having what I call adventures in consciousness that I couldn't explain logically. Oh, I could go on for days about those things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, feel free to share some of that with us. What was that like? What are these adventures? What did you experience?
Well, I have a memoir called Messages of Hope, and it was turned into a beautiful documentary that's available on YouTube and Amazon Prime that shows that journey. And in the documentary, we recreated the scene in my meditation where I was sitting there being quiet, trying to connect with Susan. I had heard little bits and pieces of phrases, beautiful phrases in my meditation previously, but like so many people who start connecting with higher consciousness, I was convinced I'm just making up what I'm hearing.
Mm.
Well, whoever was speaking to me knew they had to do something stunning to really get my attention, so I'd know I wasn't making it up. And on this one particular day, probably around 2009, 2008, all of a sudden my finger twitched. I somehow knew I was supposed to pick up a pen, and I started writing this beautiful phrase. And one phrase turned into 2 to 10 to pages, at least 3 pages. And I realized the lines were rhyming. They were perfect stanzas, perfect poetry that perfectly answered a question I had asked of higher consciousness a few days earlier. I started sobbing because that I knew could not have come from me. I had never written poetry. I could not come up with something like that in about 5 minutes' time, just straight through. I took it out and read it to my husband, who couldn't understand why he heard me crying while meditating. He, a retired Navy ship captain, was crying when I finished because he said, "You didn't do that." So that was a real turning point. But there have been many, many, many over the years.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's amazing, isn't it? That's
Yeah.
amazing. And so, where did this writing come from? I know a lot of people talk about how we receive messages from higher beings, angels, masters, but
Right.
also from our loved ones.
Right.
Did this
And
come from
it
her?
can come
Or?
from any level. At the time, these poems then continued daily for over a year. And I asked who's giving me these, and they told us to call them the Council of Poets. That group ultimately became the group of guides who told me to call them Sanaya, who's given me over 4,000 messages daily. I post them on Facebook, on my website at dailyway.org. And they're made up of various levels of consciousness, whatever's appropriate. But this is a point and a word that I haven't brought up until now. Their messages very often contain evidence. What I'm talking about here is automatic writing and channeling, but my daily work as a medium, one-on-one sessions with people to connect with their loved ones, are based on evidence from those across the veil. And by that, I mean, I'm not satisfied with these communications unless I tune into information that I couldn't possibly know and that the person I'm sitting with can validate. So that's what has helped my left brain fully accept what's coming through in this more intuitive way through the right brain.
I'm just thinking, if that happened to me, I would find that quite hard to suddenly accept that, especially with such a strong background in the Navy and like you were saying, your brain functioned very differently at that point. What was it like when you realized what was happening? How did you come to a point where you accepted that?
It was so exciting, and it's still exciting. I still do. I do about 1 reading a day when I can, when my travel schedule and internet access allows it. And I still clap and I say, yay, because I get what I call gold nuggets from those across the veil that I know their loved one cannot explain away. And it's exciting to me because the way that I truly knew we were connecting with Susan was when I took my husband to a medium. It was my first time to visit a medium. A couple years before I had any idea I would one day be a medium. And she brought through irrefutable evidence that Susan was right there in the room with us. And so for me to start tapping into other people's loved ones was so exciting to know that I had the potential to bring the kind of healing to others that medium gave to our family in just 1 hour. It rocked my world. For a couple of years had been saying, Susan, prove to me that you're here. I want to know this is you. And that medium did that. And now I can do that for others. And hopefully through my classes, teach others to make that connection themselves, not just to be mediums, but for what I call personal mediumship.
Because we often think that somebody has a gift who enables that communication to come through, don't we? So you were saying that you were trying for so long, then you went to a medium, she came through. How do we go from not relying on another person to bring us those messages?
Well, that's the key. You have to believe that it's possible for you and not just other people. And that's why I love that I can sit here and say, look, I have not seen spirits my whole life. I didn't think it was possible. So the belief is the first step. Then the intention to make that connection yourself, because nothing's going to happen unless you set it in motion through your own intention and conscious belief. And then a practice to quiet the mind, and then understanding how this connection works. And that's beyond the scope of this program today, to get into the 0-point field, the field of all consciousness, how to dissolve into that and surrender your focus on the human side. But this is the beauty of this work that I do. Once I found out that it can be taught by teaching systems and theory and then practical tools, and then dissolving all of that and just being in that state of suspending your human nature and accessing what's already here in the field, all of that put together is, to me, part of the messages of hope that we can all do this. Why? Because all of us are souls, and we're connecting with other souls. A soul is an expression of the light of consciousness. We are that, and that's our essential nature, far beyond this human story that we're living here, our human experiences. And you've done 11, this is your 11th season now of near-death experience stories. All of those point to the fact that we are souls having a human experience.
Totally. I can't deny it. For me personally, I'm like, there's so much proof, and I've been so lucky to do this work and just to hear story after story. I have no doubt that there's something beyond this lifetime, and I leave it to the listeners to work it out for themselves. But from what I've seen, there is so many ways to look at it. I think, I don't doubt it at all. So my question for you, Suzanne, is if we all have the ability to tap in and to talk to our loved ones, talk to our higher self, higher source, whatever it is we want to call it, why do some people feel like they're born with this gift? We hear about people who can't shut it down. They see spirits from, when they're a young child. They have these gifts stronger than somebody who's had to sit down and try and bring them out. Why are some people gifted and some people aren't?
Like anything, there are going to be a variety of answers. But if we look at the whole, for the most part, I would say that those people have a calling. Many people say to me, am I supposed to be a medium or not? And so whether you're born with it or whether it comes about later in life, when you become aware of this ability, it's a calling. Those who are listening may not have had any inkling until now that mediumship is in their path. But if all of a sudden you have to know more about it, you need to dive in, you want to make this happen, then it very likely is a calling. And so I feel like I'm one of those people. The analogy is, some people are born a Mozart. Those are the people who have been seeing spirits all their lives. I'm not. I'm somebody that I am so committed to this calling. I'll practice my scales every day until I get to the highest level that I can achieve. So that's why there's hope for all of us. But you have to have that burning desire in you to really, really open it up, because it is a commitment. And we really have to work on ourselves to, like I said, to part the veil. Well, the veil is the layer of human conditioning that veils the spirit world that's right here, right now. So it takes discipline, even though it's a very right brain, undisciplined practice. So you can see the paradox.
Yeah, I totally can. What about, I want to change tack slightly to talk about spontaneous experiences, spontaneous after-death communication, where perhaps you don't even know that the person has died. they show up to you in some form and you find out afterwards that they've died, or you see something which you weren't trying to connect with the other side in any way?
Yes, this happens quite frequently to so many people who I talk with. And this does not necessarily mean the person is meant to be a medium. Those in the spirit world tell us that they can see by our energy field, by our aura, if we can perceive them. And there are certain moments when perhaps the spirit has passed. They're trying to get their family members' attention to let them know, I'm here, I still exist, I'm around you, don't cry, don't suffer. But their family isn't sensing them. Scanning the connections, perhaps friends or distant relatives of the immediate family, they can see in the aura a frequency, like there's something in their radio tuning dial that's going to be allowed them to pick up their presence. They will do what I call drop in on that person, make their presence known, deliver their message. So it's just something in the frequency that they knew, the person across the veil knew they would be perceived, and they take advantage of that.
Oh, wow. That I haven't heard that before, and that totally makes sense for me. Do you think that our grief...
May I add something to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very important, and it's a point that most people don't realize. If you have one of those visits, that person is really there. Most people are just so stunned they stare. But the point is, these discarnate spirits, these souls, are still people. It's not just an apparition. So the best thing we can do in that instance is open our heart and engage them, communicate with them, say, wow, welcome. Why are you here? Who are you if you don't know who they are? What message do you have and who's it for? And they will communicate.
Oh, it's beautiful. The question I was going to ask was, do you think that our grief can distort our ability to have visits, to receive messages?
It can, but never let that cause you to believe that you can't have any communication. Grief, as we know, comes in waves. So that communication may not take place while you're in the trough, but it will pass, and it will pass after a period of time. But even in the midst of grief, there will be moments when spirit can get through. So the most important part is to not shove down one's grief because you think it will keep you from hearing from your loved one. Shoving it down will keep you from hearing from your loved one because that causes a blockage within you. Feel the grief, honor it, because it means you love that person so deeply. But know that in the meantime, you can be learning about the afterlife. You can be learning about afterlife communication. You can be meditating and working on yourself.
Grief is so important to work through, isn't it? So important. The messages, I love what you say about the aura. I'm sort of just back a little bit. I'm catching up to our conversation because that really works for me. How much do you think that the other side are trying to connect with us? Because I know we're quite keen to connect with them. We're always pursuing, which is why we seek out mediums, why we try and get answers from the other side. How much do you think they're trying to give us information or say hello to us after they're gone?
Oh, it happens quite a lot, especially in the beginning when they know that a visit or some sign will be healing. It's very important to understand that those across the veil don't feel emotions like we do here. So to attribute to them frustration or sadness is a very human trait. We leave those behind quite a lot with the body. So it's different. They're so surrounded by love and by the light of consciousness that they know all is well. But if I can let my loved one know I'm here, that's going to propel their soul's journey. That's going to bring them relief. And so they do try. And it becomes a matter of learning how they communicate with us, because not everyone is going to hear perfect phrases. Not everyone's going to see an apparition. So we start to learn about the other kinds of after-death communications. And there are some wonderful books about that, such as Hello from Heaven by Bill Guggenheim, full of
right here
aides. There you go.
Yeah, he's coming on to talk to us as well, which is going to be great.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yep. Or exactly. All these different types. So it might be smelling someone. There's dreams. There are apparitions where we see someone. There are so many different ways to connect with us. So yeah. I also question, like, I love what you're saying, because it seems like the other side are coming to comfort us in some way.
And to help our soul's journey. Truly, we are all here to realize, to remember we're not only human, that there is a greater reality, to let our souls shine, and to experience unity consciousness, that at that level of the soul, we are all connected. So when they get to the other side, suddenly that's what's important to help the soul's growth. And certainly by helping us heal and understand that through after-death communications, it's perfect. It serves several goals at once.
Yeah, exactly. So they're coming back to help us, and it's part of that interconnectedness, isn't it? So it's beautiful.
Yeah. And an important point here is that if we don't hear from a loved one, it doesn't mean they don't love us. It doesn't mean they're not there. It may be part of our path that we go down a different path. I'm a medium, and I have heard very little from my mother since she passed 3 years ago. And I know it's because I needed to lessen my dependence on the Susie mommy story, if you understand that. Okay. That is a part of my story, but my path now is about the soul's growth. So to continue that story and my neediness of my mother would keep me stuck in a lower pattern. So I've heard from her just enough to know that she'll always be part of my story. She'll be there when I cross, and we'll get to reunite. But for now, my attention needs to be on the bigger picture. It's going to be different for each person, but the last thing we need to be doing is thinking something's wrong with us, or they don't love us, or we'll never see them again.
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the questions that I asked, or reasons I asked the question around grief, was because I know people very, very close to me who have lost loved ones, and they're just desperate to hear from them, but the loved ones actually going to other people around them. So that was interesting what you said as well about the aura, how they may go where the aura is more open to having that visitation. The same thing. Now, you talked about your mother. As you're talking about her, you've not heard from her a whole lot, and I hope it's okay to reference to her directly.
Sure.
I have heard people saying that they've had communication with their loved ones who have passed, and they're saying, I have to go away for a while. I'm not going to come and visit you for some time. I've either got work to do, or there's going to be a time where I'm not here so often to communicate with you. Is this something you've come across frequently?
In all honesty, in connecting with thousands of souls, I personally have not experienced that. So I can hypothesize that certainly those across the veil are busy, and their own soul's growth might require that. But I also know, and I'm hearing my guide right now tell me this is true, that those across the veil can be in two places, more than two places, she says. Now, if you're laughing about, she's talking to her guide, my guide Brenda was my friend in physical form. Okay. She passed 3 years ago. And she now helps me with my readings. And every time before I do a reading, just to make sure I'm tuned in across the veil, I say, hey, Brenda, tell me what our friend Lynette is doing right now. I'll check with her to verify. And it's accurate all the time. And just before this program began, I didn't expect to hear from Brenda, but I asked to tune into my team so that the answers I give you today will come from a higher place than just me. And Brenda dropped in and said, hey, Lynette was handling a pair of mala beads today. And just before we started, I texted Lynette and said that. And Lynette said, absolutely, just put them in a bag this morning. Wow. When I say Brenda just interrupted me to say we can be in more than one place at one time, there's your evidence. It doesn't have to be big time, heavy duty evidence, but I know this is Brenda. She knows what Lynette was doing this morning. Do you see the web of consciousness?
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I absolutely love that. Yeah. And it raises my brain's just flicking in all sorts of directions here, because that makes, I want to carry down the path that I was on. What do you think we do, or what do you think we can potentially be in both places at once, I think. What do we do on the other side? It's a question I get emailed a lot. How do we spend our time? Do we have hobbies? We talk about work.
Okay. I have my most popular video on YouTube is what are our loved ones doing in the afterlife? It has over 500,000 views, and anybody watching should go watch that one, because it's about 45 minutes to an hour of stories that I don't have time to share now. But it depends upon where we are in our soul's awakening process before we pass, and how much of our life experience we got to experience while we were still here. Brenda had a full awakening from a life of a lot of trauma right at the end of her life. She just got it. She understood, I'm a soul. And so she was immediately awake, had fun visiting all of her friends and giving us signs for about a year. And then she says, let's get down to business. I was so drawn to mediumship before I passed. Suzanne, I'm going to help you with your mediumship. So now she's my guide. It's absolutely stunning. So much evidence. And one of the most stunning stories I ever heard of someone who came through within one day of passing. Others are a little slower. And they, as you'll see, and if anybody watches that video, they may be enjoying golf across the veil, which sounds so silly. But if you can create with consciousness, you can create any experience. If you didn't get to visit Paris and you want to across the veil, boom, you're instantly there. And then after a while, once you've completed all of your desires, then you might start saying, okay, what's next for this soul? It's going to be different for everyone.
Very interesting. I'm going to link to that YouTube video because I myself want to go and watch that one. So I'll put that link in there. If you are listening to this, just have a look in the show notes. It will be there. Interesting that you talk about if you wanted to go and visit Paris and you didn't get the chance to, you can go now. When people talk about seeing spirits, we talk about ghosts as well versus spirits. If you were in Paris, visiting Paris, is that an example where somebody might be seeing a ghost, or how does that kind of play out in this physical world where it's a spiritual interaction with the physical world? Does that even make sense?
What we call ghosts, I may not exactly answer your question, but what we call ghosts are those spirit beings who like a certain area and hang around for a reason. My most recent book, I think it is, is called Droplets of God. And it's the biography of a revered medium, Mavis Patilla in England. And there are several examples in there where people were frightened because a place was haunted and they're hearing bumping noises and they're getting chilly feelings, and it was all spooky because don't human beings like the drama and the spookiness? And they brought in Mavis, and she sensed these ghosts, and they were spirits who were trying to get a message across to help the people here, to save lives. They enjoyed hanging around. There was purpose in it. So would we sense someone in the spirit world who was visiting Paris? Not necessarily. It's a different bandwidth of frequency beyond the normal one that we're in. A medium might very well sense that, but not normally others.
Okay. And so is there a way to describe, I've heard ghost people talking about how there's spirits who haven't quite, either they haven't realized that they're dead or they haven't been at a point where they're ready to leave this world?
I do not specialize in that. In fact, I didn't believe that there was like this middle world until I had an experience with one soul. And I just, once again, opened myself to the belief that this was possible and said, you have died. You must completely leave this earth plane, your attachment to it. Look around you. There are helpers here to take you to the light, so to speak. It's a metaphor. Well, I mean, we are the light. We cannot be anywhere but in the light of consciousness. Well, there's a whole rest of this story that actually was quite beneficial for that soul, and a healing took place for someone here after that person had been hanging around a while. So I do give credence to it. It's one of those things we'll really know it for sure when we cross the veil and see how it works. But as far as souls being stuck, that's a scary thing to us humans. And to my understanding, and from the way my guides have explained it, there are just souls who don't realize there's another level, another reality that they can experience fully, but they're so focused on this one or don't realize what has happened to them. And there are certain souls who specialize in saying, hey, all you have to do is set the intention to move on, and you do.
It really gets my mind going. Makes me think of a
know.
lot of different things there. I want to just backtrack a little bit. I'm aware I'm jumping all over the place. It's because, like I say, my mind is just so excited and catching up on some of the conversation points we've got. You talked about how Brenda was your friend in the physical world. When she passed, she became one of your spiritual team, one of your guides.
Yes.
Do we choose our guides or do they choose us? How did that sort of work? Do you know?
From what they've told me, we absolutely choose each other at the soul level many times before we come into these bodies, but we're souls now, so we can have these conversations, but it's outside our awareness. Yes, she's confirming, a lot of these conversations take place when our human body is sleeping, and we're just deciding and making agreements. So
Wow.
it is mind-boggling, but I trust this. Yeah.
Oh, totally. No, it resonates with me because I feel like my father is on my team now. He passed nearly 10 years ago. I feel like he's one of my guides now. And
yes. We all have guides who are with us from the first breath in this physical body to the last. That's our main spirit guide. But some family members who have an affinity for this, who have learned enough to work as a guide, will come through in my readings and show me a little symbol. I'm guiding them. And then I know that they're a guide. So I would probably see that from your dad if I were doing a reading for you.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And do guides come and go? Because I've heard that guides might be with us for a certain time for whatever we're going through in our lifetime, and then they might go and another one might come in.
Yes. Yes. In fact, I have a HemiSync recording called Getting to Know Your Guides, and you can learn that you have several guides that you didn't know about. So specific times in your life, as you say, perhaps somebody's going through a divorce or a relationship challenge, you would have a guide that would help you navigate that, or a physical illness, that type of thing. A joy guide. I love that thought. I have felt several of those, and they're just wonderful.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Yeah. Are you able to, Suzanne, just give us a bit of an overview around masters, guides, guardian angels, all the sort of the different hierarchy, I suppose, of the other side? Does that make sense?
It does. And what they've told me over and over is they don't consider it a hierarchy. It's more a level of responsibility, increasing responsibility, which I understand in my military jargon. It's like higher rank, and yet they don't see it as a point of power. So spirit guides such as Brenda, recently in human form, she's working one-on-one with me. Those in the angelic realm work with larger groups of people. The higher you go, the archangels and masters like Jesus or Buddha, they can affect all of humanity. And yet we can communicate with them as well, which is really important to know. I teach that in my personal mediumship class. First, believe it. Set the intention, and you can connect with any of the masters. And what's really cool is once you learn that they don't mind if you put them to the test and ask for evidence. Is this you? One of the videos on my website, The Miracle of Christ Consciousness, shows how I am convinced beyond a doubt that I was communicating with Jesus, not raised that way. And he's just the most amazing, loving teacher. Communicated with Archangel Michael. That's a new video that's just very popular because we all want to know we're not alone. And I guarantee you, we are not. And there are these higher beings who will knock your socks off with evidence that they're helping if you ask for evidence.
It seems to come full circle around, doesn't it, to sitting and asking and creating that space to hear the messages, which is something I know you've got your courses on. It's something you teach. It's something you help people with.
Yes, I have a gifts page on my website, SuzanneGiesemann.com/gifts, with several meditations that are very helpful, tools for clearing your energy field, and a recent YouTube video. Again, I don't want this to sound like a pitch, but this is what I do is I help people do this for themselves. And that one little video called Sip of the Divine, SIP, is just the most simple practice for asking a question of higher consciousness and receiving an answer every day. And people are finding it transformational because it's so easy and so productive.
So basic. We don't need any gear. We don't need anything. We just need to sit and be and take the time.
Yes.
I love that. Is there one overarching theme or message or something which really you have on your heart to share with our audience today?
I do, and it's different every time. But
I'm sure.
You and I were talking before this program that you're in lockdown where you are, and the whole world is just in chaos with all that's going on. And there's a phrase that my guides, Sanaya, by the way, I learned after they gave me that name, that the name means one worth knowing. And it also means flash of lightning, which is how my stepdaughter was killed. So it's a very, very appropriate name. They gave me a beautiful quote years ago, and it's just the crux of everything we've been talking about. And they said, "What do you do when the world gets you down? You realize this is not the only world, and this awareness makes all the difference in the world." So I encapsulate all of the teaching that I do into a way of living that I called the awakened way. It's based on messages from a young man named Wolf in my book, Wolf's Message. That's also a life-changing story. But the awakened way of living is based on 3 principles. And the number one principle we talked about throughout this is understanding you who are listening are a soul here and now, having a human experience. And the second principle of living the awakened way, like my friend Brenda did, who ascended immediately, is that we're all interconnected. We're part of one big web, not just here in human form, but across all dimensions. And that web is made of the light of consciousness. And the third principle is that we find our way home. We find our way to our true nature through the heart, through the feeling, knowing sense, not necessarily through the thinking sense that's more related to the human side. So when we can live with those principles in mind, life becomes magical. The troubles that we face here in human form, we understand, are always temporary. And the underlying essence of all reality is goodness and light and love. And that may sound like Pollyanna, but it's truth.
I love it. There is so much in there. You've said a couple of things today which have really stuck with me. One is the auras. One of them is how we might communicate with our guides while we're asleep, and how we might choose our guides and the spiritual team that we have helping us while we're here. These other little nuggets, my brain is just going to have a great time after this as I go through and re-listen and just think about some of these bigger topics that we've talked about. But Suzanne, I just want to say a huge thank you for joining us today. It's a topic that I'm learning more and more and more about, and your conversation really helps me, and I know a lot of our listeners today. So Suzanne Giesemann, thank you so much.
Blessings to you and your work to get the word out. It's all about love.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated with all of the events we have going on, and to visit www.letstalkneardeath.com to join the VIP community.